The blood-streaked sky of Montana Territory painted an ominous backdrop as Hannah Thornfield clutched the empty wooden cradle, her fingers tracing the initials carved lovingly into the headboard. 4-year-old Emily's absence echoed through the cabin like a haunting melody that wouldn't fade, even 6 months after the fever had taken her only child. Montana Territory, 1873. Summer was giving way to autumn, and the changing leaves mirrored the transformation in Hannah's life, vibrant possibilities withering into barren despair. At 26, she had already weathered more storms than most twice her age, losing her husband James to a mining accident 3 years prior, and now Emily, the only light that had kept her moving forward through the darkness. Hannah lifted her gaze to the window. Outside, her small vegetable garden withered from neglect. Once, it had been her pride rows of corn, beans, and potatoes that fed her little family through the harsh winters. Now, weeds choked the few remaining plants, much like grief choked her will to continue. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Hannah rarely received visitors these days. Most folks in Silverpine had stopped checking on her after the first few months, their well-intentioned visits dwindling as Hannah's grief showed no signs of abating. Mrs. Thornfield. A deep voice called through the door. "It's Sheriff Wilson, just checking to see if you're all right." Hannah sighed, smoothing her wrinkled dress before opening the door. Sheriff Wilson stood on her porch, hat in hand, concern etched on his weathered face. "I'm fine, Sheriff," she said, the lie coming easily after months of practice. The sheriff's eyes drifted past her to the disheveled interior of the cabin. "Been meaning to tell you, Mrs. Thornfield, there's a cattle drive coming through next week. They'll need supplies, might bring some business to town. If you were thinking of opening the store again, the general store." James had built it with his own hands before turning to mining for better prospects. After his death, Hannah had kept it running while raising Emily, but after losing her daughter, she hadn't been able to face the townspeople's pity. The store had remained closed, its inventory gathering dust. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I don't think I'm ready." The sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, just thought I'd mention it. The drive's led by Tucker Hayes. Good man from what I hear. His outfit will be in town for a few days at least." After the sheriff left, Hannah found herself standing in front of the general store attached to her cabin. Dust coated the counters and shelves. Inventory sheets lay where she'd left them 6 months ago. Opening again meant rejoining a world that had continued without Emily in it. Hannah turned away. She couldn't do it. Not yet. The following days passed in the same fog that had enveloped her since Emily's death. Hannah moved through her routines, mechanically cooking meals she barely tasted, cleaning rooms that never really got dirty since no one used them, and sitting for hours in the rocking chair by the window, watching the world continue without her participation. On Tuesday morning, the distant sound of cattle and men's voices drifted through town. The cattle drive had arrived. Hannah peered through her curtains at the commotion in Silverpine's Main Street. Dust clouds rose from hundreds of hooves as cowboys guided the herd through the north end of town toward the holding pens at the south edge. Despite herself, Hannah found her attention drawn to a tall figure on horseback. Unlike the other cowboys who shouted and waved their arms to direct the cattle, this man seemed to control his section of the herd with quiet authority. His horse, a magnificent chestnut, responded to the slightest movement of his hands. Later that afternoon, another knock came at her door. Hannah opened it to find Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, standing on her porch with a covered basket. "Brought you some bread, dear," she said, handing the basket to Hannah. "And to let you know the cowboys are asking about supplies. Sheriff Wilson mentioned your store but said you weren't open." "I'm not," Hannah confirmed. Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. "I know it's been hard, Hannah. We all miss little Emily, but perhaps it's time to rejoin us. The town needs your store." After Mrs. Peterson left, Hannah sat at her kitchen table, the bread untouched before her. The town needed her store. But what did she need? She had felt empty, hollow, since Emily's death, a vessel with nothing left to give. The next morning, Hannah was startled awake by a firm knock on the store's front door, not the cabin entrance. She quickly dressed and made her way through the connecting door to find a tall man peering through the dusty glass of the store window. When she opened the door, she found herself looking way up into the face of a man who appeared to be in his early 30s. His skin was tanned from constant exposure to the sun, laugh lines etched around eyes the color of a summer sky. Unlike many men on the trail, he was clean-shaven, revealing a strong jawline. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of wheat. "Tucker Hayes. I run the cattle drive that's camped outside town. Sheriff mentioned this was a general store." "It was," Hannah replied, suddenly conscious of her unkempt appearance. "It's closed now." Tucker Hayes studied her for a moment before speaking. "I've got 30 men who need supplies, Mrs. Thornfield, Hannah Thornfield, Mrs. Thornfield. My men need coffee, tobacco, ammunition, and various sundries. I'd be willing to pay premium prices if you'd consider opening just for us." Hannah hesitated. The thought of dealing with 30 boisterous cowboys made her stomach clench. Yet something about Tucker Hayes's steady gaze made it difficult to simply shut the door in his face. "I don't know," she began. "Just for the drive," he pressed. 3 days at most. We've been on the trail for weeks, and the next town with a proper store is 4 days away." Hannah glanced over her shoulder at the dusty shelves. She did have the supplies he needed, and the money would be welcome. She'd been living off her dwindling savings. "I'll need time to get things in order," she said finally. Tucker Hayes's face broke into a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made Hannah's heart skip a beat, a sensation so foreign after months of numbness that it startled her. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornfield. I'll send a few men over this afternoon." "Is 2 o'clock suitable?" Hannah nodded, already wondering if she'd made a mistake. After he left, Hannah surveyed the store with new eyes. Dust covered everything. Merchandise needed to be reorganized, prices checked. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of purpose. By 2 o'clock, Hannah had transformed the space. The floors were swept, counters polished, and merchandise arranged. She'd even washed her hair and changed into a clean dress, though she told herself it was simply proper business etiquette, not because of the way Tucker Hayes's eyes had seemed to see through her grief to the woman beneath. True to his word, at precisely 2 o'clock, Tucker arrived with 5 of his men. They removed their hats upon entering, their manners surprisingly gentle for men who lived such rough lives. "Mrs. Thornfield," Tucker said, his eyes taking in the transformed store. "You've worked a miracle in just a few hours." "Hardly a miracle," Hannah replied, though she felt an unexpected warmth at his praise. "Just soap and effort." For the next hour, Hannah helped the cowboys select their supplies. They were unfailingly polite, if a bit awkward around a woman. Tucker supervised, occasionally adding items to the growing pile on the counter. As she tallied their purchases, Hannah found herself watching Tucker from beneath her lashes. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to responsibility. His men clearly respected him, deferring to his judgment without question. "That's quite a total," Hannah said when she finished calculating. Tucker didn't blink at the amount. "Fair prices considering our need." He counted out the money, adding a few extra dollars. When Hannah raised her eyebrows, he simply said, "For the inconvenience." As his men carried out their purchases, Tucker lingered. "Will you be open tomorrow as well? Some of the men couldn't leave the herd today." Hannah nodded. "Yes, from 9 until 4. Tucker placed his hat back on his head but paused at the door. "Would it be forward of me to ask if you might join me for supper this evening? The cook with our outfit is surprisingly talented." The invitation caught Hannah off guard. She hadn't shared a meal with anyone but Mrs. Peterson since Emily's death. The thought of sitting among strangers making conversation seemed overwhelming. I don't think so," she said finally. "Thank you for the invitation." If Tucker was disappointed, he hid it well. "Of course, perhaps another time." That night, Hannah lay awake longer than usual. Opening the store had exhausted her physically, but her mind remained active. Tucker Hayes's face kept appearing in her thoughts, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he gently corrected one of his men who'd placed muddy boots on her clean counter. It had been so long since she'd noticed a man in that way. After James died, she'd been too focused on Emily and survival to consider that part of herself. After Emily's death, she'd felt nothing but grief. Yet today, helping Tucker and his men, she'd felt something. Not happiness, perhaps, but a momentary reprieve from sorrow. The next day brought more cowboys to her store. Hannah found herself watching the door, anticipating Tucker's arrival. When he finally appeared in the late afternoon, she felt that strange flutter again. "Mrs. Thornfield," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I hope today has been profitable for you." "Very," she admitted. "Your men have been most courteous. They know I'd have words with any who weren't." His smile softened the statement. He browsed the shelves while she helped another cowboy, but she remained acutely aware of his presence. When the store emptied except for Tucker, he approached the counter. "I need a few personal items," he said, placing a small list before her. Hannah gathered the items: shaving soap, a new razor strop, writing paper and pencils, and surprisingly, a small book of poetry. Wordsworth. She asked, unable to hide her surprise as she noted the title. Tucker's cheeks colored slightly. "Trail Gets Lonely. Good words help pass the time." As she wrapped his purchases, Tucker cleared his throat. "My invitation for supper stands, Mrs. Thornfield. No obligation, of course." Hannah hesitated. Yesterday, refusal had been automatic. Today, the prospect seemed less daunting. Perhaps I could stop by briefly." His smile was worth the anxiety that immediately followed her acceptance. "I'll come escort you at 6 if that's suitable." After he left, Hannah alternated between anticipation and panic. She nearly talked herself out of going a dozen times as she changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that James had always said matched her eyes. She pinned her dark hair up in a style she hadn't bothered with in months, and even dabbed a touch of rose water behind her ears. At 6 o'clock precisely, Tucker knocked on her door. He'd clearly made an effort as well, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. "You look lovely, Mrs. Thornfield," he said, offering his arm. The cattle camp was set up in the meadow south of town. As they approached, Hannah could smell coffee and beef cooking. Several cowboys nodded respectfully as Tucker led her to a wagon where an older man presided over several Dutch ovens. "Cookie, this is Mrs. Thornfield. She's honored us by accepting our hospitality tonight." The cook, a grizzled man with a magnificent white mustache, made an awkward bow. "Madam. Hope you like beef stew. It's what trail hands get, but I added extra vegetables for the occasion." Tucker led her to a place of honor on a log near the fire, bringing her a tin plate of the promised stew and a surprisingly delicate cup of coffee. "Cookie keeps this cup for special visitors," he explained. The stew was delicious, the company surprisingly easy. Tucker introduced her to his men, each of whom displayed impeccable manners in her presence. They shared stories of the trail that made her smile despite herself. As the evening progressed, Hannah realized she was enjoying herself. It had been so long since she'd felt anything but grief that the sensation was almost foreign. Yet there was also guilt. How could she laugh when Emily would never laugh again? Tucker must have noticed her sudden withdrawal. "Would you care for a walk?" he asked quietly. "The evening's pleasant, and the view of the stars from the ridge is spectacular." Hannah nodded, grateful for his perception. As they walked away from the fire, Tucker maintained a respectful distance. "You've been through something difficult," he said after they'd walked in silence for several minutes. It wasn't a question. Hannah nodded, surprised to find tears threatening. "My daughter, Emily, she died 6 months ago, fever." Tucker was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Losing a child, there are no words adequate for such a loss." "No," Hannah agreed. "There aren't." They reached the ridge, and Tucker was right. The stars were magnificent, spread across the Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. My wife died in childbirth 5 years ago, Tucker said suddenly. Along with our son, I thought the pain would kill me too. Hannah turned to look at him, seeing the old grief etched in his features. Does it ever stop hurting? Not entirely, he admitted. But eventually, you find moments when the memory brings more comfort than pain. And one day, you realize you've gone an hour without thinking about it. Then a day, it never leaves you, but it changes. They stood in companionable silence, two people who understood loss in a way others couldn't. When Tucker finally escorted her home, he didn't try to prolong the evening or presume upon the connection they'd established. "Thank you for joining us tonight, Mrs. Thornfield," he said formally at her door. "Hannah," she corrected him softly. "You can call me Hannah." His smile was gentle. "Hannah, thank you. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow night. We leave the following morning." The knowledge that Tucker and his men would soon continue their journey brought an unexpected pang. In just 2 days, these strangers had brought life back to her empty store and reminded her that the world continued beyond her grief. "I'd like that," she said. The next day was busy at the store as the Cowboys made their final purchases before continuing their journey. Hannah found herself making recommendations, suggesting items they might need on the trail ahead. Each interaction became a little easier, the weight of her grief a little lighter, if only temporarily. Tucker arrived late in the afternoon, as she was preparing to close. "I've come to escort you to dinner," he said, "but also to ask a favor." "What kind of favor?" Hannah asked, curious. "Several of my men have letters they'd like to send. I was hoping you might direct me to whoever handles the mail in Silverpine." "That would be me," Hannah admitted, "or it was. The stage comes through on Fridays and I was the designated mail stop before." She trailed off. "Before," Tucker finished for her, understanding in his eyes. "I can take their letters," Hannah offered. "The stage will be here day after tomorrow." "Thank you," he hesitated. "There's something else. One of my men, young Billy, has taken ill. Nothing serious, but he needs rest more than trail riding. I was wondering if there might be somewhere in town he could stay for a week or so until he's fit to travel. We'd pay for his board, of course." Hannah thought of her empty spare room, Emily's room. She hadn't entered it in months. "I have a room," she heard herself say. "He could stay with me." Tucker's surprise was evident. "That's very generous, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition. The room is empty." The word caught in her throat. Tucker studied her face. "Are you certain?" "Yes," Hannah said, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. It would be good to have the room used again. That evening at the camp, Hannah met young Billy, a freckle-faced cowboy barely 18 who apologized profusely for being a burden. "It's no burden," Hannah assured him, touched by his earnest manner. "I've been alone too long." As they ate around the campfire, Hannah found herself watching Tucker with the men. He was respected but not feared, the kind of leader who earned loyalty through fairness and example rather than intimidation. He noticed when one man hadn't eaten enough and quietly ensured he received seconds. He listened attentively to concerns about a section of the herd that seemed restless. When it came time for Hannah to return home, Tucker walked with her as he had the previous night. The air between them felt charged with unspoken possibilities. "So you'll take Billy in tomorrow?" Tucker confirmed as they reached her porch. "Yes, send him over whenever he's ready." Tucker nodded, seeming reluctant to leave. "Hannah, I want to thank you for your kindness these past few days. To my men and to me, you've been kind as well," she replied. "It's been healing. To be useful again." Tucker took a step closer. "May I write to you after we reach Wyoming?" The question shouldn't have surprised her, yet it did. "You want to write to me?" "Very much," he admitted. "I've enjoyed our conversations. I'd like them to continue if you're willing." Hannah thought about receiving letters from this man, about having something to look forward to. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." Tucker's smile warmed her more than the summer evening. For a moment she thought he might kiss her and was surprised to realize she would welcome it. Instead, he took her hand and pressed his lips gently to her knuckles. "Until tomorrow, then," he said. Hannah slept better that night than she had in months, her dreams for once free of feverish children and empty cradles. The next morning, she found herself opening Emily's room. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the window as she stripped the small bed and replaced the linens with those from her own room. She packed away Emily's toys and clothes, tears streaming down her face as she touched each beloved item before placing it in a trunk at the foot of the bed. By the time Tucker arrived with Billy, the room was transformed, still simple, but welcoming for a young man rather than a memorial to a little girl. "This is mighty fine, Mrs. Thornfield," Billy said, clutching his small bundle of possessions. "I promise I won't be no trouble." "I'm sure you won't," Hannah replied, showing him where to find things in the kitchen. "And please call me Hannah." Tucker watched their interaction with approval. "Cookie packed some remedies for Billy," he said, placing a small sack on the table. "Nothing serious, just a bad chest cold that needs rest more than trail dust." With Billy settled, Tucker reluctantly announced he needed to return to the herd. "We move out at dawn," he explained. "I've got last-minute preparations." Hannah walked with him to the porch, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye. In just 3 days, this man had awakened feelings she'd thought were buried with her husband and daughter. "Thank you again for taking Billy in," Tucker said. "I'll send one of the men back this way in 2 weeks to collect him and settle his board." "There's no need to pay," Hannah began, but Tucker shook his head. "I insist. He's my responsibility." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, neither wanting to say the final goodbye. "I meant what I said about writing," Tucker finally said. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you when I return this way? It would be spring before the drive comes back through." "I'd like that," Hannah replied, her heart beating faster at the thought of seeing him again. Tucker stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Hannah, I know we've only just met and your heart is still healing. I don't mean to presume or rush you, but I feel a connection to you that I haven't felt in a very long time." Hannah nodded, unable to deny she felt it too. "I understand," she whispered. "I feel it as well." This time, Tucker did kiss her gently, briefly, a promise rather than a demand. His lips were warm against hers, and for a moment Hannah felt truly alive again. "Until spring," he said softly, stepping back. "Until spring," she echoed. As she watched him walk away, Hannah realized the emptiness inside her had shifted somehow. It wasn't gone. Emily's absence would always leave a void in her heart, but Tucker had shown her that perhaps there was room for new feelings alongside the old grief. The next morning, Hannah rose early, knowing Tucker and his men would be departing. She and Billy stood on the porch, watching as the cattle drive slowly moved south out of town. From a distance, Tucker raised his hat in farewell. Hannah waved back, a promise in the gesture. The days that followed brought changes to Hannah's life. Having Billy in the house meant cooking proper meals again and keeping regular hours. His youthful energy and constant apologies for imposing made her smile despite herself. She found herself telling him stories about Emily and James, memories she'd kept locked away for too long. She reopened the store permanently, resuming her role as Silverpine's postmistress as well. When the first letter from Tucker arrived 3 weeks later, her hands trembled as she opened it. His handwriting was surprisingly elegant for a cowboy, his words thoughtful and often poetic. He wrote of the cattle drive's progress, of the changing landscapes they passed through, and of his growing certainty that what he felt for her was more than passing interest. Hannah wrote back, hesitantly at first, then with increasing openness. She told him about reopening the store, about Billy's recovery and subsequent enthusiasm for helping around the place, and eventually about Emily, her smile, her laugh, the way she'd loved to hear stories about princesses and dragons. By the time Billy was well enough to travel, Hannah had received 3 letters from Tucker. The young cowboy had become like a younger brother to her, his presence helping to fill the silence of the house. "You should come with me, Hannah," Billy suggested as he prepared to leave with one of Tucker's men who had returned as promised. Boss talks about you in every letter he writes me. He'd be mighty pleased to see you." Hannah smiled but shook her head. "My place is here, Billy, but tell him." She hesitated. "Tell him I look forward to spring." As autumn turned to winter, Hannah's correspondence with Tucker became her greatest joy. Each letter revealed more of the man his childhood in Texas, his dreams of someday owning his own ranch rather than driving other men's cattle, his quiet love of poetry that he'd never admitted to his men. In return, Hannah shared her own history coming west as a bride at 18, losing James just 5 years later, raising Emily alone until the fever took her too. With each letter, the weight of her grief seemed to lighten a little more, making space for new feelings to grow. Winter in Montana was harsh, but Hannah found herself looking forward to spring with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Tucker's last letter before the mountain passes closed had confirmed he would return with the spring drive, and the promise sustained her through the long, cold months. As March turned to April, Hannah began watching the trail south of town, knowing it was still too early but unable to help herself. The general store was flourishing again, and she'd even begun to join in community events, Christmas services at the small church, quilting bees with the other women, even a dance where she sat along the wall but found herself tapping her foot to the music. One evening in late April, Hannah was closing the store when the bell over the door jingled. She looked up, prepared to tell the customer she was closed, and found Tucker Hayes standing in her doorway, hat in hand, his eyes drinking her in as if she were water after a long drought. "You're early," she managed to say, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "Couldn't wait any longer," he admitted, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. "Hannah," this time when he kissed her, there was nothing hesitant about it. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as his mouth claimed hers with a hunger that matched her own. Hannah wound her arms around his neck, responding with all the longing that had built during their months apart. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I've thought of nothing but you," he confessed. "Every mile, every day just brought me closer to this moment." "I've missed you too," Hannah whispered. "Your letters kept me going through the winter." Over dinner at her table, Tucker explained that he'd arrived ahead of the main drive with just 2 men, eager to see her again. "The herd follows in about a week," he said. "We'll be in town for 3 days, then continue north." Hannah felt her heart sink at the reminder that his stay would be brief. And after that, Wyoming again, Tucker reached across the table to take her hand. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what, on you?" He took a deep breath. "Hannah, I know it's soon. We've only spent a handful of days in each other's company, but I feel I know your heart from your letters and you know mine." Hannah's pulse quickened. "What are you saying, Tucker?" "I'm saying that I love you, that I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." His grip on her hand tightened. "I've saved enough to buy a small spread not far from here, good land with water rights. It wouldn't be easy at first, but we could build something together." Hannah stared at him, overwhelmed by his declaration. "Tucker, he pressed on, words tumbling out now. "I know you still grieve for Emily. I would never ask you to forget her. She'll always be a part of you, a part of us. But there's room in a heart for new love alongside memories of those we've lost. You taught me that in your letters." Tears filled Hannah's eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. "When Emily died, I felt so empty," she whispered. "Like there was nothing left of me to give anyone." Tucker nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I felt the same after losing Margaret and our son, like I was just a shell, going through the motions of living." Hannah squeezed his hand. "But then you came to my door asking me to open the store and something changed. Not all at once, but gradually. You helped me remember that I'm still alive." "Is that a yes?" Tucker asked, hope lighting his features. Hannah smiled through her tears. "It's a yes. I love you too, Tucker Hayes." The week that followed was the happiest Hannah had known since before Emily's illness. Tucker stayed in the small hotel in town but spent every waking hour with her, helping in the store, sharing meals, and planning their future together. They decided to marry before the cattle drive continued north, with Tucker returning at the end of the season to start their life together on the new ranch. When Sheriff Wilson agreed to perform the ceremony, he seemed more pleased than surprised. "About time you found happiness again, Hannah," he said gruffly. "James and Emily would want that for you." The wedding was simple but joyful, attended by the entire town and all of Tucker's cowboys. Hannah wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from back east months before, though she hadn't understood at the time why she'd felt compelled to buy it. Mrs. Peterson baked a magnificent cake, and the celebration lasted well into the evening. The farewell 3 days later was bittersweet. As husband and wife, they'd shared only 2 nights together, but Tucker promised to return by October at the latest. "I'll have the house ready," Hannah promised as they stood wrapped in each other's arms beside his horse. "It won't be much at first." "It will be perfect," Tucker assured her, "because you'll be there." He kissed her one last time before mounting up. "I'll write at every opportunity." "I'll be counting the days," Hannah replied. As she watched him ride away, leading his men and the massive herd north, Hannah felt none of the emptiness that had consumed her after losing Emily. There was sadness at the separation, certainly, but also hope and anticipation for the future they would build together. True to his word, Tucker's letters arrived regularly throughout the summer. Hannah divided her time between running the store and preparing for their new life together. She ordered furniture, linens, and kitchen supplies. She hired men to make repairs to the small house on Tucker's new property. She even planted a garden there, traveling out twice a week to tend it. By September, Hannah found herself facing a new and unexpected joy. Her monthly courses, which had returned to regularity after Tucker's first visit, had failed to appear for 2 months running. The local midwife confirmed what Hannah had begun to suspect. She was carrying Tucker's child. Her letter sharing the news crossed paths with Tucker's announcing he would be home within the month. When he arrived in early October, Hannah was waiting on the porch of their new home, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. The look of wonder and joy on Tucker's face as he realized the meaning of her gesture was something Hannah would treasure forever. He was off his horse in an instant, gathering her in his arms with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tucker placed his hand over Hannah's where it rested on her stomach. "When I first met you," he said softly, "you told me you felt empty. Do you remember?" Hannah nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I remember. I said Emily was gone and I was empty." Tucker kissed the top of her head. "And I said, then let me fill the years beside you. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever life brings us, joy or sorrow, plenty or want, we'll face it together." Hannah turned her face up to his, love filling her heart until she thought it might burst. "Not empty anymore," she whispered. "Not even close." In the spring of 1875, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Thomas James Hayes. As she watched Tucker hold their son for the first time, tears of joy streaming unashamedly down his face, Hannah felt the final pieces of her heart healing. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Emily Hayes, a spirited girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. The ranch prospered under Tucker's careful management, eventually growing to one of the most successful operations in the territory. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Tucker presented Hannah with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of all their children, Thomas and Sarah, as well as the twins, Robert and Margaret, born 3 years earlier. But what brought tears to Hannah's eyes was the small portrait on the opposite side, a painting of Emily, created from Hannah's descriptions by an artist in Helena. "So she's always with us," Tucker explained, fastening the locket around Hannah's neck. "A part of our family, just as she's a part of you." Hannah touched the locket, then reached up to caress her husband's face, now bearing the distinguished lines of a man in his prime. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed. "After losing her, I was certain that part of my life was over forever." Tucker pulled her into his arms, as strong and sure as the day they'd met. "Life never stops offering us chances for joy if we're brave enough to take them," he said. "You taught me that, Hannah Hayes." As they stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, watching their children play in the yard before them, Hannah thought of the empty woman she'd been when Tucker first knocked on her store door. The road from that day to this one hadn't always been easy. There had been hardships, droughts, harsh winters, even a frightening episode when Thomas had developed a fever that brought back all of Hannah's worst fears. But through it all, Tucker had kept his promise to fill the years beside her with love, with children, with purpose and partnership. The emptiness that had once threatened to consume her had been transformed into a fullness she could never have imagined in those dark days after Emily's death. "I love you, Tucker Hayes," she said simply. "Thank you for helping me live again." His answering smile was as warm as the Montana sunset spreading before them. "Thank you for letting me," he replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd shown that very first time. "Here's to the years we've shared and all those yet to come." As twilight settled over their ranch, Hannah leaned against her husband's solid strength, contentment washing over her. The young widow who had once believed her heart would never heal now stood surrounded by the evidence that life, like the seasons, moved in cycles of death and rebirth. The empty cradle that had once been her only focus had given way to a home filled with children's laughter, a husband's love, and the quiet certainty that Emily would always be remembered as the beginning of a story, not its end. And in that moment, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, her past honored, her present cherished, and her future stretching bright and promising before her, filled with the love of the man who had seen her emptiness and offered to fill it with a lifetime of tomorrows.